information. It's 2:02. Not too bad for Jewish time, ladies, would you say? So welcome everybody to this afternoon. It's Tuesday afternoon of our convention in person and virtually. On behalf of the International Board, I'm Susan Farber. I have been co-chairing Women's League Reads program with Merle Karras. Merle has chosen to remain at home in New Hampshire. So I have come here up the road from Cincinnati so I could be with you and welcome you and introduce our guest speakers this afternoon. So I'm going to introduce Rachel Kamin in a few moments. In terms of housekeeping, we are going to have a conversation for a certain interval of time. We're going to entertain like 3 questions from the audience. And then there are still additional books out there that Rachel may be still able to sell you. We brought 20 copies. And when in the coming months, the bookshop.org portal to benefit Women's League for Conservative Judaism and local booksellers becomes activated and we send out information about how to use it, you'll be able to order not just Riva's book, Golem Girl, but many other books of prior Women's League Reads authors that have been interviewed. Anise, is there anything you need for me to know? Okay, thank you, everyone. So, Rachel Kamin. She has been for more than 25 years a Jewish educator and librarian. At the moment, and for a number of years now, she's been at North Suburban Synagogue Beth El in Highland Park, Illinois, since 2008. She has the position of being Director of Lifelong Learning. She was recently honored in 2021 with the Fanny Goldstein Merit Award by the Association of Jewish Librarians. She also serves as a member of the committee of the Sidney Taylor Book Award, as well as the Association of Jewish Librarians Jewish Fiction Award. She's writing articles over time and reviews of books, and many of her articles have appeared in journals on librarianship. She's most proud that at the Sisterhood Torah Fund Book Club of North Suburban Synagogue Beth El in Highland Park, she facilitates their book discussion as well as for 3 additional Chicago area synagogues. So I turn the program over to Rachel and I'll step down so I could help facilitate any Q&A later on.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to introduce Riva Lehrer, who we were fortunate to have at NSS Bethel last year. And so when Rachel Farber, one of the co-chairs of the conference, was looking for some local celebrities that we could bring to you here at the convention, everyone who heard Riva at Bethel last year was like, let's bring that Riva Lehrer. She was amazing. And so it was wonderful. And we led a book discussion. I think many of you were on Zoom last month. We had a book discussion. But it's okay if you have not read the book yet. You'll be fine. So I think you'll want to read the book after our conversation. So Riva Lehrer is an artist, writer, and curator whose work focuses on issues of physical identity and the socially challenged body. She is best known for representations of people with impairments and those whose sexuality or gender identity have long been stigmatized. Ms. Lehrer's work has been seen in venues including the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian, Yale University, the United Nations, the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., the Arnault Museum, the Cordova Museum, the Frye Museum, the Chicago Cultural Center, and the State of Illinois Museum, to name a few. Yeah, very impressive. But there's more. Her awards include the 2017 Three Arts McDowell Fellowship for Writing, as well as the 2015 Three Arts Residency Fellowship at the University of Illinois, a Carnegie Mellon Fellowship, a Prairie Fellowship at the Ragdale Foundation. She's also received numerous grants from various organizations and institutions, including the National Endowment for the Arts. A longtime faculty member of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, Riva is currently an instructor in medical humanities at Northwestern University and is one of the inaugural Disability Futures Fellows sponsored by the Ford and Andrew Mellon Foundation. So welcome, Riva, and thank you so much for being here. So we're going to just dive right in. And as you can see, this is my personal copy. I love these page flags. When I lead books for book clubs, I read a book first. I don't do a book for a book club that I haven't read. I read the book first, and then I have to read it a second time to prepare for the discussion. And that's when I get out my page flags. So of all the interesting and insightful and important things that are mentioned in the book. So my first question upon reading this, and this is, we'll talk about this, but this is not just a book. This is an art book. This is not just a memoir. It's an art book. But talk about how you transition from being a visual artist to a writer. There we go.
Well, I mean, I haven't transitioned in that I'm doing both. I mean, I'm still doing both. I have a lot of training as a visual artist. I have pretty much bupkis as a writer. So that was a several year period of realizing what it means not to have any training. I don't recommend it. And, but the main thing I think that let me do it is that I've taught for decades now. And one of the things about teaching art, and I know some people told me as they were coming in that they had children or husbands or parents who were artists. I'm hearing myself, I don't actually have a loud S normally. It's an interesting mic. Anyway, I sound okay. All right. I sound like a cartoon character to myself. Anyway, that when you're teaching art, you're always having to take something that is essentially not verbal and translate it into words. So being both specific about your ideas and creative in terms of how you're going to say something, because you can't just say, this is red. I want you to make this red. Like you have to, you know, there's a lot more to discuss in the redness of the world. So I think that was my initial training. And then I did get to work later with some truly incredible editors, including, I would really recommend bringing in a writer when you can, if you haven't already done it, Goldie Goldblum.
Yeah.
You've had Goldie?
I have had Goldie Goldblum. Oh, you guys had her too. Oh, you're right. We did do for Women's League reads during the pandemic. Goldie's novel is On Division Street.
Yeah, she has multiple novels,
Yeah.
but that's the one
most recent.
It's fantastic. And she was my first editor. So, and a very close friend.
Wonderful.
So that was a great way to start.
And On Division
Division.
Street. On Division Street by Goldie Goldblum. So Riva's memoir is divided into two parts. The first part focuses on your childhood, and then part two delves into your art and your career, your sexuality, your relationships. Why did you decide to structure the book in this way, in these two parts?
Well, part one is Golem and part two is Girl. And part one is about the construction of myself as a monster. That in my childhood, I mean, first off, I assume most of you know the story of the golem, or der Golem in Yiddish. So the golem is a constructed being who is built for the purposes of the community and the rabbi, but not for itself. And so I thought a lot about what it meant to be a disabled person born in 1958 when there was no societal place for someone like me, meaning that, you know, what am I being saved for? Am I being saved for myself as a human, or to satisfy science, to satisfy my parents, and then to be rejected by the community at large, which is what happens to the golem. There are a lot of other intersections for me with the legend. If you're interested at all in understanding more about the story of the golem, there's quite a bit written about the ethical implications of the story, which are completely fascinating, and about what the golem is allowed to want, why it's rejected in terms of its specific desires, depending on which version of the story you get. And again, you know, as a disabled person at the time, you weren't supposed to want anything. You were supposed to just kind of survive and be amazing that you survived and yippee. So there were a lot of places that were step-ins. And then during Girl, it was something I won't, and if you haven't read the book, no spoilers, but something happens at the midpoint that then ejects me from the world I had been in, and I had to figure out how to be an adult. So that's what Girl was about. Like, do I get to be a girl, a woman, a person with sexuality? Because growing up, I was told quite specifically that I would never have a relationship of any kind, or a family, or anything like that. Not cruelly, but it was like, we don't want you to get your hopes up kind of way. We're trying to protect you. So Girl was really about, do I get to be, so I've been built as a monster. Now do I get to be a person?
And do you want, I realize too, if people haven't read the book yet, Riva, do you want to just give a little background as to to your origin story in 19?
Well, the rocket ship came down and it landed in a deli. Anyway, and then there's fueled by matzo balls. So I was born in 58 in Cincinnati. My mom, okay, Cincinnati, here we are. I met your daughter, for anyone who knows, tell me your name again, Marcia? Okay. I just did a gig in Cincinnati, so I met the next generation of Shayna Maedalas. So at the time that I don't want to spoil too. How has anybody in here not read the book?
People have not read the book.
Okay, so no spoilers. So when I was born at the time in 1958, they had only very recently figured out how to close the spina bifida lesion. I'm still doing research on when that was, but it couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years before I was born, if that. And so up until then, kids with spina bifida, the idea was that you'd wait to see if they lived till 2 years old. And if they lived until they were 2, then you could try surgical intervention, but almost none of them did, because spina bifida, if it's really an open lesion, means that your spinal cord or your spinal canal at the very least is open to infection. And so either people would die of brain infections, hydrocephalus, where spinal fluid backs up into the brain, or usually kidney failure. So if you did live, you were generally extremely impaired. So most kids like me were institutionalized. But in the book, there's a twist that, again, I don't want to go into because I didn't know about it until I started writing the book. When you find out why I wasn't institutionalized, I think I forgot to say that I didn't know anything about that until I started doing research. So I ended up growing up with my family for remarkable reasons. But again, this is decades before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I talk a lot about what that meant, about what expectations were or mostly weren't for anyone with a disability. And I talk about the special school I went to, which is quite a story. And then in part 2, I go to art school and I get one hell of a hot boyfriend. And
There's a picture in the book.
there's some
for
pictures.
proof.
He just came, well, he's not that one. I think that was a later really hot boyfriend. But the guy that you see in his older years who's over an architectural table, that's William 40 years later or something, but he just came to visit me. We're still friends. But at the time, he was the kind of guy that people would like spin around on the street. Like, so everyone thought that we were fake because I was not so beautiful and he was. So there was constant messages of he must just be being nice, something like that. And it felt really great. But it goes on to weave together my path towards becoming a portraitist who works with people who deal with stigma. And my path towards being a very physical person. So that's part 2. And an introduction to disability culture.
Just because this is Women's League, can you talk about in what ways you feel Judaism has intersected with all the different parts of your identity or not intersected?
Well, the golem is certainly an intersection.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in ethics, so was really interesting as I was looking up more about the legend. To my work is based in ethics as a portraitist, so thinking about that level of the story was fascinating. But more specifically, so I grew up conservative, at times Orthodox, depending on whether I was living with my parents or living with my grandparents. And my brothers and cousins and friends and neighbors and postmen, for all I know, all went to Cheder. I did not, because the idea was that there's no point, because I wasn't going to have a family. I wasn't going to be with anybody. Judaism is about making more Jews, apparently, full stop. And so my own education, or included in my community, or learning Hebrew or why? You know, I wasn't important that way. And I don't think that they were mean. I think it just didn't occur to them that this was important. I did ask repeatedly to go to Cheder, and there was always excuses. Later, I joined Habonim. I'm sure some of you guys are of the Chavarim. That was great. I learned a lot. I thought I was going to make Aliyah. But when it got to it, my parents let my little brother make Aliyah and not me, because I wouldn't survive it, right? Big old cripple. So he went off and I did not. And that was also wonderful. And then since then, it's kind of been, I feel like my life as a Jew, that ethics really is a big part of it, that I grew up in a very, my father was an accountant, and you want to hear about ethics, he'll be the daughter of a CPA, because his clients wanted him to do some shady freaking stuff. And dad would be on the phone going, Saul, I don't, you can't. And then I would work for dad sometime, and I'd hear his clients come in and try and weasel various things, and dad would just be cringing, and there's a lot to say there. But there was also a lot of tzedakah in my family, even though we didn't have much money, but there was always an orientation towards that kind of ethics. And so I feel like my evolution as a portraitist whose work is based in informed consent and mutual autonomy, that really is a direct outgrowth. Also Yiddish. I've always loved Yiddish. I've studied it on and off. I'm on multiple Facebook pages right now about people who love Yiddish, and taking it on and off on Duolingo when I have time. And so I feel very Jewish. I just feel Jewish kind of like without an island underneath me of fellow Jews. So just kind of like a Jew off on her little iceberg, which is what happens to Frankenstein, the most famous golem, now that I think of it. So actually Frankenstein's creature, because Frankenstein sounds like such a Jewish name. Or as we know, Frankenstein, right? It's like Igor, exactly. Walk this way. I could walk this way. Anyway, yeah.
Well, and as you can all tell, I mean, as emotionally difficult as the book is to read at times, I was surprised by how much humor and Jewish humor Riva injects into almost every page. Like one of the ones I marked is, Riva, when you describe your hospitalization as an infant, you write, "Sometimes my surgeons didn't even bother stitching me up between operations, but simply tied me together like a Shabbos brisket."
True.
So, oh,
And now my earrings are coming where?
oh, okay.
That
So-
was an argument. Oh my God, I sound like me.
oh,
Can you hear me? Am I on? I'm not on. That's why I sound like me, because I'm not on. I'm not on.
now you are. Okay.
Okay, now I'm on. All right.
So were you were you conscious of the humor and the voice? And I guess someone's asking about the decision not to translate the Yiddish.
Well, there is, that is better. Thank you. Well, two things. Usually in a book where something like Yiddish is employed, it's in italics. And I argued against that because I felt that the Yiddish in the book, when you read italics in a text, it throws you out of the text a little bit. It says special word being used in a slightly different voice. And I felt like the Yiddish that I used was absolutely part of my thought processes, my normal thought processes. So, so the first thing was that we were not, my editor agreed not to italicize. The other part was that we live in the land of Google, and I felt like if you don't know this word, go learn it. I didn't want to spoon feed. And, I felt like they would learn more of what the word was, what the etymology was, how it's used because I'm always looking stuff up while I'm reading constantly. And that, okay, let's foster good reading behavior, or just skip it and
you'll be fine.
stay ignorant.
Yeah.
Fine, be like that.
What about the humor, Riva? Were you conscious of that, or did it just happen? That's who she is.
But also I was aware that I was handling at times very difficult material, and that it's not that I never did anything, and I'm writing another book now, and I'm not doing anything to make something funny. It's either got something, humor is really perspective. And so I kept trying in different ways in the text to step back, particularly if something was really difficult, with a few exceptions. There's a chapter in the middle where I just go for raw emotion, but for the most part, I didn't, because I felt like, well, why am I telling this story? What's the point? because I'm not really an egomaniac. I hope. I have to ask my exes. I could be wrong about that. But really, when you read a memoir, unless someone is an incredibly superb writer, you have to ask, well, what's the point of me knowing this story? And for me, it was really about taking my experiences and using them to explain aspects of our society. And so it means a lot of constant stepping back. And so really that's what humor does, is it just, it's a moment of stepping back and some reviewing.
Yeah, and it's great. You can't help. There's a lot of those chuckle lines. Wendy Cormish writes in the Evanston Roundtable that Golem Girl is an autobiography, a family history, a history of medical advances in surgery, a history of accessibility to education for disabled children in Cincinnati, a love story. But with the beautifully reproduced color images, it's also essentially an art book. So did you envision it first as an art book with personal narratives included, or did you set out to write a memoir from the beginning, or is it an autobiography?
It was none of those. Actually, it started as, I know I've told you this before. So I've had various hospital adventures, and after a particularly nasty one, I thought, okay, my family's going to be my art executors. They know, insert expletive, about what I do. And I've explained it, but do they listen? No. And so I wanted to leave them basically an extended artist statement about what my work is about. And so I started to write that. And the thing is, when I've had to explain why I do what I do, I've had to explain what it means to me to be part of disability community. So I could never, I could never just write about a painting without some personal context. So I was writing this, and it was just going to be like basically something they could give gallerists and curators and stuff. But I wish I could remember what it was. I've never been able to remember. But a question came up when I was thinking about my childhood for some reason in regards to one of the pieces. And I thought, oh, I don't know this thing. Next time I go home to Cincinnati, I should ask somebody. So I went home and I asked whatever it was to my Aunt Ruth. And anybody out here know Ostrogevsky? Anyway, you know Diane? My cousin, her mother. I asked her mother this, whatever question it was. And Ruth Strigevsky was the single most dramatic member of our family. Ruth used to just, I can tell you this, you'll appreciate this. Every year, Ruth and her husband Sam would write a pastiche of a Broadway show for the local JCC, and they would all just happen to star Ruth. Pure coincidence. And so there's Ruth, flashing her excellent legs year after year after year, and singing. And then Sam passed away. Ruth got older, and she developed colorectal cancer, and she would show up places and say, "I'm 85 and I have a colostomy, and nobody knows." I miss that woman. Anyway, so I asked Ruth this question, whatever it was, and she goes off and she starts telling me stories about my family. I'm like, what? So the question, and then I was asking my other side of the family about some of this, like, wait, was this true? And so the upshot was that I started finding things out about the family that made a different kind of sense of my childhood, and also startled the hell out of me. And then the book started turning into more of a story. but I still thought that I would sell it someday to a very small university press. My partner at the time was writing academic books, and I figured I'd be with like Duke or somebody where you get $2,000 for a book, and I would be happy. And then a whole series of weird things happened, and I ended up with a high-powered agent, and we sold it to Penguin Random House for more than $2,000. So, yeah, yay, Marcus Hoffman, man. He's also gorgeous. And he plays trumpet and he surfs and he's multilingual.
This is your
Sorry,
agent,
Mary,
yeah.
this is my agent, but
Yeah.
I meet with him, I'm like, anyway, I got so lucky. I don't remember the question.
Well, that it transitions to my next question, which is like what the conversations that you had with, tell us about the conversations you had with your editor, your publisher, and the decisions that were made in terms of which images to include, the size, the placement, the overall design and production.
So, yeah, so following on the fact that it was originally an art statement, not even an art book, when I started writing the stories, so in the book, if you haven't read it yet, every chapter is titled with the title of a horror novel or a horror movie. And like I said, I kept wanting to put all of my stories into societal context. And then the portraits that I had done started to interlock with the stories. They're not illustrations. I know people call them illustrations. An illustration is a picture that's done for the sake of explaining a story. None of these are that. They're my career. But some of them started to resonate really strongly with chapters. I wanted the images to lead people through the book. And so when Marcus and I went looking for a publisher, the book went up for auction, which was great. And we had a whole bunch of presses vying for it. But my hardcore was, so if you look at the little mutilated copy we have here,
Well read,
the-
not mutilated,
I'm
the
te-
well read.
I'm teasing you, I'm teasing you. Let's see if we can find one of these. Where's one of the paintings? Come on, honey.
So there's
Let me
paintings,
find a
there's
painting.
actual photographs of Riva from her
There's
childhood,
personal
from her life.
photos. But
from
what
her
they
family.
did, well, here's one. So this is called color on page. There's a few terms for it, but color on page, because if you think about it, most books that have images have something called a signature, where it's a chunk of photo paper that's kind of stuck in the middle or the back, and all the images are printed on photo paper. And then you kind of flip through the pictures, and then you go back to reading and you forget about the pictures for the most part. And because the images were so, especially once I started talking about my visual career, I absolutely did not want that bounce. So we were looking for a press that would commit to color on page. A number of you have complained about how heavy the book is. Well, God bless them, because they used really, really seriously high quality paper in this thing. And it's also called cream coat. So for instance, on this one, which is a drawing of my brother and his son, who is disabled as well. Nate is developmentally disabled. Just a cool technical thing. If you look, I don't know if you can tell, this is kind of gray. The drawing is kind of a cold gray series of tones, and the paper is yellow. So that's a dropout. What they do is where the images is stark white, so that when you put the image over it, the whites show through. So the image isn't yellowed. Everything around it gets cream coat. So they did just such an incredibly beautiful job. So,
Which is why we only have the hardcovers for sale today.
oh, thank you. I
because-
didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah,
thank
I mean,
you.
the paperback is great, but
The hard
you want the hardcover. Yeah, I
When you're right, you're right.
think.
So
I mean, you can order the paperback, but but then you're not getting the quality of the paper.
It's
and-
different. Well,
yeah.
and this has a secret cover.
Yes, tell us about this.
All right, they did this as a gift to me. I couldn't believe it. So this is a detail of a self-portrait that's the frontispiece inside the book. But I worked really closely with the design department at PRH, and we got along great. And they, as a gift to me and a surprise, they did another cover inside that's on the hardboards. And so the paperback doesn't have this. And a lot of people never realize it's there. They don't take off the dust jacket. So I like to think that someday it'll slip and they'll see that there's a surprise waiting.
Great. I want to make sure to leave some time for questions. So if there are questions from the audience. Yeah, and we can repeat them or whatever's easiest.
Oh, sure. I've only read the first 2 chapters. I just got a little busy before convention, but I really am excited to read it. You do use humor. I'm not sure, is that to mask resentment, or are you resentful for the way you were treated by your family? That's not something that you feel.
No, I mean, sometimes I'm pissed about things more at my grandmother, but that's different. I feel that they were following the societal dictates of the time. If I have anger, it's towards the societal assumptions much more than my family, as you'll see, went through a lot that didn't have to do with me. And I think that they were really increasingly struggling and trying their best. And were quite overwhelmed. I adore my parents and miss them all the time. And I'm very close to my middle brother. I think people tried, but I think society has a hell of a lot to answer for.
Martha? I'm a huge fangirl, fabulous. I read it very quickly. We'll go back. My rabbi, a couple of Yom Kippurs ago, he posed 2 questions for us to think about, and this was, with you of, I want to know more. So the questions are, what keeps you up at night? What gets you up in the morning?
Oh boy. The list. There are personal things, and there are, God forbid Trump comes back. That's one. Climate change is a big one. Those 2 worry me a lot. And just what's going on, Ron DeSantis. There's a lot of the Supreme Court decisions.
No problem, thanks.
Did you need to repeat?
Yeah, so the question was what keeps you up at night and what gets you up in the morning?
Okay. So as I was saying, politics keep me up a lot, and some of the Supreme Court decisions that we're all familiar with will have severe eventual effects on disability in this country in so many different directions, including, college admissions and people getting born with no social safety net. And so that stuff. And there's a lot of personal stuff in my life. As an aging crip, is you don't run out of things to worry about. What gets me up? Obligations, really. I have a solo show in a year. I'm working on a new book, and I'm dating someone really hot. So those things either, guilt or desire get me up in the morning.
Yeah. What about, I guess, Riva, tell us about the book you're working on now.
If I have time. I'm getting no writing time. I've just had a lot going on. I just hired a new editor, so that was smart. Sorry, the lights back there, I know I should take my hand down. But they're, thank you. Any bit helps. This eye doesn't contract. So it's been straight bullet in the brain for the last, anyway. My book, it's called Animate or Animate, depending on how you say it. It's about a young woman with a facial variance who has hidden socially behind her older cousin her whole life, and something tragic happens to him. She spins emotionally, can't really deal with it, and goes into this whole crazy series of events involving cadaver labs and puppet theaters and, as you do. So,
Fiction, fiction.
really? So that's what I'm working on.
We have one
Yeah.
more question from the audience, maybe now three.
Or a couple more, yeah.
Alana's next. I can imagine that it's hard to not hold resentment, given everything that's happened. And I'm thinking specifically with your art, and I know you went to an art school, which is not where you wanted to start out. Do you, now that you've achieved all this success, have something look back at people and want them to see it and present the people who were so politely unsupportive of your efforts initially, or you just high above that?
So I guess, I don't know if I can repeat the question, but Alana's asking about how, with perspective and all the success that you've achieved, how you look back at some of the obstacles and people you had to overcome.
Well, I wouldn't say they're unique to me. I hear the same stories over and over in different forms from so many other people in disability community, whether, personally or writing or through art. I know that the things I went through, almost none of them are unique. I didn't know that for a long time, but I have found that out. And that changes how you feel because, I don't feel, it's not that it was never personal targeting, but it was societal bullshit to the max. So, I mean, most of the people that I'd be really resentful of, they'd be dead. So, that also helps.
Okay, Debbie. Riva, I think I told you that my sister had cerebral palsy. My family told my mother that she was crazy to have another child. I was the second child. And my mother said to her, I'm gonna have this child, and she's gonna be perfectly normal. How did your mom know? Were you the first? I've forgotten. You were the first child.
So Debbie's asking about birth, about birth order.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, my mother knew the reason why my sister was born with cerebral palsy was not a birth defect, it was because she was born. Pardon me? It was genetic.
No,
not
CP
genetic.
isn't genetic.
Not genetic at all, because she was not properly delivered,
Right.
okay?
That's almost always it.
Yeah. So my mother made sure she had a cesarean the second time. They let her labor over 24 hours and didn't do a cesarean. So what I'm asking you is, final visit, how did that come about? And it's obviously not genetic. Other things, your brothers were normal, but yet you have a nephew that's not.
I don't know if I can repeat the question.
By the question, Debbie's in a situation where her older sister, because of the birthing process, ended up being diagnosed with cerebral palsy.
in Riva's situation, she is the first of 3 in birth order. So I think part of the question is, what provoked her parents, or her mother in particular, to continue to try to conceive a child in a day and age in 56, 57, 58, 59, where if you had a child with a significant physiological disability, like in this case, spina bifida. Okay, I'm sorry. So the fact that Riva is born with spina bifida, then her parents conceive and have 2 other children. So part of it is what prompted, what motivated, what was the power of the parents' conviction to continue to have a child. That's part of it.
Okay, let's stop there. It's a lot.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. At the time, it was assumed, nobody knew what spina bifida was caused by. Nobody knew. Later, it turned out to be mostly a folic acid insufficiency, either not getting enough of it or not being able to process and store it. It can be either. But there is some, I mean, mom had 3 miscarriages before me. I think they were probably all neural tube defect infants because she also developed type 2 diabetes fairly as a young mother, and people with either form of diabetes tend to have a high rate of neural tube defect infants, but nobody knew that at the time. But I don't know. I wasn't anything she ever discussed with me, and she died young, so I'll never know.
So I think we're, Susan, I think we're running out of time because we do want to have some time for some book signing. So thank you so much, Riva.
Thank you, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Susan, for organizing this session. So like we said, there are some more copies of the book available for sale. There's 8 more copies. But don't worry, if you already have a copy at home, we have some little book plates that Riva will sign for you, or if we run out of copies, you can get a book plate signed. If you can live without your Amazon.com, Prime discount, I do recommend bookshop.org, supports your local independent bookseller. And you can order the book there or purchase it wherever you buy your books.
Women and children books here in Chicago.
A lot of places here in
You can-
Chicago. And I also out on the table, so I always, for my book clubs, put a read-alike list together. So I have copies of the read-alike book. So if you like Riva's book, some other recommendations that I got from Riva and that I was familiar with, kind of what to read next. I will also say that this book is a great book club selection. There's not a book club discussion, or there is a book club discussion guide on
Not
the
in the book,
on
but
the publisher's website. There's a book club discussion question.
there is on the Jewish Book Council
Jewish Book
website.
Council, yeah.
And I did send it to PRH. So if you can't get it through PRH, then, you can reach me through my website and I can send it to your, so it's just rivalaireart.com. And I
If you
can
Google
send you.
Riva Lehrer, her website comes up first. So you're easy to find. And I will say too, if anyone, I have notes from when I led book discussions. So, you're welcome to email me. I'm happy to send you the notes. I won't send you all my notes, but I will send you my discussion question notes because it does make for a great book discussion. So I think Riva's going to run out to her car and get something,
I
and
just
then
need to-
she will meet us back at the book signing table
Indeed.
right outside.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. My info? Oh, I can give you a card, and also on the handout outside is my information too, but I have cards as well.